Hello and welcome. We're going to dive into a really critical case study today. We're looking at Ghana, and specifically, how a conflict happening thousands of miles away can send shockwaves that put a nation's entire economy to the test. This is all about resilience.
So let's start with this fundamental question. How can something happening so far away really affect the food that ends up on your family's table? It seems disconnected, but as we're about to see, our global economy is so intertwined that a shock in one place can be felt in kitchens and on farms all over the world.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with that big global shockwave. Then we'll get into a really interesting kind of counterintuitive situation in Ghana's economy called the resource trap paradox. From there, we'll see how all this lands on farmers, creating a massive headache for the government. And then, most importantly, we'll talk about the path forward, the 3 keys to building real, lasting resilience. Okay, first things first. It all starts with a trigger, a major geopolitical confrontation. Now, while it might just seem like a distant headline, economically speaking, it unleashes a massive shockwave that ripples across the entire globe. This is a big deal. So, how does this shock actually travel? Well, you can think of it as moving through 3 main channels. First, you get wild swings in the energy markets. Second, crucial shipping lanes, think the Strait of Hormuz, suddenly become choke points. And third, a general cloud of financial uncertainty descends, making everyone nervous. And it's the smaller, more open economies like Ghana that are most exposed and get hit the hardest. Now, this brings us to something really fascinating, a real paradox. You'd think, wouldn't you, that if you're a country that exports crude oil, high oil prices would be great news. But for Ghana, it's just not that simple. The reality is actually much, much more complicated. Let me give you an analogy to make this really clear. Imagine you have a small solar panel on your roof. You sell the power it makes, and you get a pretty good price for it. Great. But you still have to buy all the electricity to actually run your house from the main grid, and that price is through the roof. In the end, what you're paying for power completely wipes out what you earned. That, in a nutshell, is the situation Ghana finds itself in.
And this really lays the whole structural problem bare. See, on the one hand, yes, Ghana's making more money from selling its raw crude oil. But on the other hand, it has to import nearly all of its refined fuels, gasoline, diesel, and those costs have just skyrocketed. So what's the net result? The overall economy actually shrinks because those import costs are just so crippling.
And what we're seeing here has a name. It's a textbook example of the resource trap. It's this frustrating situation where a country has plenty of valuable natural resources, but that wealth doesn't protect the wider economy. The gains from crude oil just get swallowed whole by the cost of imported energy, leaving the entire country exposed to these inflationary shocks. So we've talked about the big picture, the macroeconomics of it all. But what does this actually look and feel like for people on the ground? Let's zoom right in on the agricultural sector, because that is the absolute backbone of Ghana's rural economy. For farmers, this isn't just one problem, it's an absolute onslaught. Think about it. The cost of fuel to run your tractor? Up. The cost of fertilizer, which is super energy intensive to make? Way up. And even after you've grown your crops, the cost to simply get them from your farm to a market in the city, that's gone through the roof too.
So when you're faced with these absolutely impossible costs, what do? Well, you're forced to make some incredibly tough choices. To survive, farmers have to start cutting back on the very things they need to get a good harvest, like fertilizer. It's a decision nobody wants to make.
And the result of that decision? Well, it's predictable, and it's devastating. You can see it right here. When farmers use fewer inputs, crop yields plummet. This kicks off a really dangerous chain reaction. You get food shortages right here at home, which in turn drives food prices higher and higher for everyone. And this quote from Professor Amos Mensah just hits the nail on the head. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is something that actively undermines a country's ability to feed its own people. And of course, it hurts the most vulnerable families the hardest, people who see the little money they have just disappear. It threatens to reverse years and years of progress. So, as you can imagine, this spiraling crisis puts the government in an incredibly difficult position. You could call it a pincer effect, where they're getting squeezed from both sides at once. So look at these 2 pressures. On one side, you have immense public pressure to do something, anything, to help. To provide subsidies, to create social safety nets, to cushion the blow for ordinary people. But on the other side, the government is locked into a debt restructuring program that demands they keep a tight lid on spending. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. So what happens when you're stuck in that bind? Well, you're forced to make some absolutely brutal trade-offs. The urgent need to put out today's fire means that critical, long-term investments, things like roads, schools, hospitals, they get put on the back burner, and that can jeopardize the country's entire future.
All right, that's the problem, and it is a tough one. So, what's the way out of this? How does a country like Ghana break this painful cycle of vulnerability? Well, the answer isn't a quick fix. It's about making deep, structural changes. The analysis points to 3 strategic imperatives, things that are no longer optional. First, you have to boost domestic capacity. That means investing in local oil refineries and fertilizer plants to stop being so reliant on imports. Second, a massive push into renewable energy to insulate the power grid from these global price shocks. And third, you've got to diversify what you sell to the world, moving beyond just raw materials. And let's be clear, these aren't just nice ideas on a policy wish list anymore. This crisis has been a brutal but very revealing stress test. It's shown exactly where the cracks in the foundation are. Fixing them has become an absolute necessity for economic survival and for future growth. And this really brings us to our final, critical thought. Having some cash reserves to weather a storm is important, sure. But what this case study really shows is that a nation's true strength isn't just about surviving the crisis of the moment. It's about having the strategic vision to build a stronger, more independent, and more diversified economy for the long run. And that, right there, is a lesson for every single country in our deeply interconnected world.